in a lot of ways, we're impacting history and changing these numbers that we've seen dramatically decline for women in coaching since the passage of Title IX. We believe that stat, young girls by the age of 14 are dropping out of sport at twice the rate of young boys. It's going to change if they've got these female role models that they can aspire to be. We call it We Aspire. That's our program for aspiring coaches, to get them in the pipeline, start to give them the skills, the tools, the knowledge, and we're starting young when they're in high school to help them catch a vision that coaching can be a really rewarding career for you.
It's an incredible role to be able to have in people's lives, to be that person. But when you're being that person for dozens of athletes, it has to take a toll.
I'll be honest with you, I worked my first 2 years. I took 1 day off in 2 years. And I can tell you that's not a healthy plan. And so I learned going through that burnout is very real.
Part of the answer to a question I asked you before of what can people do, bums in seats and buy tickets and get yourself to a game. It is absolutely exciting. Hello and welcome to the Legwork podcast. This is among our first set of episodes. We're not entirely sure whether this will be the first, second, or third drop. I am Matt Vosberg, one of the founders and co-owners of Bakline. I'm here with my co-host, Molly. Molly, say hello.
Hello.
And we are here with Vanessa Fuchs. Vanessa Fuchs is the CEO of WeCOACH. This is an organization that Bakline has worked with for a number of years now, and we've had a really great partnership. And when we were thinking about our first episodes to do, we really thought of Vanessa right on the top of that list. And so we are going to be talking a bit about not only her career journey and WeCOACH more generally, but the programs that they have, women in coaching specifically, and sort of managing the pressures and the challenges associated with carrying on the mission. So Vanessa, would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners, your current role, and the trajectory that's kind of led you to where you are now at WeCOACH.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you, Matt, Molly. Really a pleasure to join you for the conversation and looking forward to it very much. So grateful for everything that your company, Bakline, has done to support our organization. And so on behalf of our WeCOACH community, thank you. And thank you also for, I feel like I live in this shirt. So thank you for outfitting me on a daily basis. Really, again, just honored to be here. I originally born and raised in South Florida, Pompano Beach, Fort Lauderdale. Did my undergrad work at Florida State University, and that's really what kind of kickstarted my career. Throughout most of my years I've spent in college athletics, had the opportunity to leave FSU and work for the Atlantic Coast Conference office, earned my master's at UNC in Chapel Hill, and then went on up to Indianapolis to work at the NCAA national office. Had an unbelievable experience at the NCAA, gained a national network of contacts in the work that we were doing there in academic and membership affairs. And then my alma mater came calling and asked me to come back and lead the compliance office at FSU in 2010. And so I spent 12 great years back at Florida State and worked my way into a role where I was senior associate AD and senior women administrator, overseeing some sports, some departments. And in 2022, the opportunity to come lead WeCOACH presented itself. And I'll tell you, that was a tough decision to leave my alma mater. And really, when I was evaluating WeCOACH, I thought about, if I were to leave Florida State, I really wanted to make sure it was an opportunity where I can continue to impact people, learn some new skills. But what I think is most special about this opportunity of working with my team at WeCOACH is, in a lot of ways, we're impacting history and changing these numbers that we've seen dramatically decline for women in coaching since the passage of Title IX. And so that's really what was so special, is the opportunity to impact history. So again, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Now your major, that was in broadcasting?
Yeah, it was media productions, communications. Good. Yeah, you've done your research.
So this is so hopefully this podcast and this episode is exactly the kind of thing that you were trained to do, at least initially.
Yeah, that's what I did. I aspired. I was either going to go into coaching or I was going to go into sports broadcasting and be on the sidelines calling games. And at the time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there weren't a lot of women in that profession of sports broadcasting. Now, grateful to see a lot more women elevating to the highest levels of calling games at every level of sport, on up through professional. But at the time, that was what I aspired to do, and took a little career pivot. The graduate assistantship I was going to take to stay at FSU and get into coaching, it was eliminated. So right at the time I was graduating, I had to do a little career pivot, and then an opportunity at the ACC came open to be an intern there. So I moved up to Greensboro. But yeah, this is right up my alley, podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is really important to highlight is that Title IX, which, we just had the 50th anniversary a few years ago now, which was such a step forward for women in sports. But I think what is less known is the step back that it kind of caused for female coaching, and the landscape of, where there were women and girls sports prior to Title IX, it was mostly women coaching them. And then I think if we can talk a little bit about the factors that led to the precipitous drop in women in coaching roles that followed 1972. And, we've never really climbed out of that. It's getting better, but it's kind of stagnated. And that's, I know a lot of the mission of WeCOACH, but I think it's an interesting story historically, and one that probably doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And we actually just released some data in partnership with the Tucker Center today on our report card for women in coaching. But you're right. So many opportunities were created through the passage of Title IX in 1972. And a lot of people don't realize that not only were opportunities for women, girls and women, elevated, but boys and men as well. The participation opportunities, particularly in, for example, in sport, have increased. But we've seen this dramatic decline since the 70s of going from over 90% of our women's collegiate teams being coached by women to now, when you look at the landscape across Division I, II, and III in NCAA athletics, it's roughly 41% of women head coaches leading women's sports teams. The youth and high school level, we don't even have really great data, but we know that somewhere around 25% women coaching girls, youth teams, and high school teams. And then when you look at the numbers of women coaching men's sports, it's 6%. And really that decline is attributed to a number of factors. But, with the passage of Title IX, there's now increased investment for women's sports. There's scholarships at the collegiate level. There's better training. You're getting better athletes. The product of women's sports is increasing, and it became more attractive. It became more attractive for men to coach on the women's side. We also have seen just as time has progressed that a lot of women point to the lack of support, lack of pay equity, and then certainly there are some unique challenges as some women coaches become mothers. And so family life and home dynamics become difficult. And so those are some of the primary reasons that you've seen that decline. But we're on a mission through WeCOACH and the work that we're doing to recruit, advance, and retain more women across all sports, all levels, into this critical profession of coaching.
And I'm so glad that you, as an organization, decided to include high school and youth sports, because I think for female athletes and girls coming up, that's so important, both to their experience and the example that they see.
Yes.
And I think that, there's not necessarily a pipeline from high school coaching to collegiate, but I think just kind of putting the precedent out there, giving girls the experience of being coached by a woman or boys, the earlier that happens, I think is critical. And also, it's tough to be a female athlete when you're, in middle school or high school. And I think having a woman to help you navigate some of that is also just so important. And there's, we lose girls in sports, what is it, like 12 or 13 is where it starts to drop off. And, I do think a lot of that is, and in my own experience coming up as an athlete, just sort of not having that support available and not knowing where to go is tough.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It's something that we focus on is, you mentioned just our youth and high school members. We've really been intentional to grow at the youth and high school levels. And really that's where it begins. If we can get more women coaching at the grassroots, youth club, middle high school teams, you're right. We believe that stat that you mentioned, Molly, of, that young girls by the age of 14 are dropping out of sport at twice the rate of young boys. It's going to change if they've got these female role models that they can aspire to be. It'll help to keep them in sport. They've got women who are serving as not only leaders of their sport team, but role models, mentors. That's going to help them catch a vision for their own lives, and what they aspire to do is so powerful. It inspires confidence in young girls to have women as role models. It inspires even positive body image for those young girls participating. And a lot of people don't realize or think about this, but young boys, young men in sport, 100% of them have male role models as leaders and coaches. And we believe that women and young girls deserve the same.
You had, I think, a pretty successful career as an athlete yourself. I assume you started at quite an early age. Did you have any personal experience? Obviously this was in a time before WeCOACH was founded, and presumably a number of the programs that are available today were not available. What were some of your mentors? How were your early years as an athlete in high school or in college shaped because you were supported, or because you weren't supported and felt like, hey, this is something I'd like to change? Yeah,
I'm fortunate. As I came up through youth sports and beyond, I've had some female coaches as role models. There's a lot of women. We have one on our staff who will tell you throughout her entire collegiate and pro tennis career, she never had a female coach. And for me, it started at a very young age. Like you mentioned, Matt, my dad got me into, and my sister and I, into playing baseball. And so we were the only girls on the little league, minor league baseball team. I was a pitcher. I loved it, striking out the boys. But that was my earliest experience with sport. I loved baseball growing up. And in the United States, it's you get to a certain age, and then all of a sudden you pivot into softball. So then I went on and played softball, but I played a number of sports. And throughout even middle school and my summer softball teams, I had some female coaches that were very influential in my life. But when I came to Florida State and played for Sue Semrau, she still to this day is one of my greatest mentors, and someone that has had just a tremendous impact on my life. And that's really where, just watching Sue lead our team, I started to think, maybe I can do this for a career.
Not the broadcasting part.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think you would have been a better broadcaster or a better CEO? I'm assuming the latter.
I don't know. Maybe you'll have to ask Sue someday.
Yeah.
She actually asked me for a glass of wine tonight, and I told her, no, I've got a podcast recording, Sue. So anyway, I digress. But just a really phenomenal leader for our team, someone that I respect a lot, and has provided me with some of the best advice in my life that I kind of still carry with me today. I'll never forget one of my meetings with Sue when I was playing, and I was coming out of my freshman year, and like a lot of freshmen, wasn't happy with my playing time, was thinking about maybe transferring where I could play some more. And she just said to me, V, you're so much more than a basketball player, and you've really got to find ways to do the little things that make you an asset for this team and this university. And I promise you, everything's going to work out. And I've carried that with me throughout my career of doing the little things that set me apart, make me an asset for not just my team, but for any organization that I've worked for throughout my career. And so I think of her on a daily basis, and she's been a heavy influence on my life.
As you took on the WeCOACH role, and in the roles that you had leading up to, I think you said it was 2022, how do you think about, you talked a little bit about some of the root causes and barriers and challenges, but I'd love for you to elaborate on the challenges to representation, whether those are funding challenges, structural challenges, historical stigmas or connotations. How do you bucket the various reasons why representation remains low?
Yeah, it's all the above, Matt. I think you hit on all of them. You go back and look at history, and again, back in the 70s, there used to be separate athletics departments for men's sports and women's programs, and there was a men's AD and a women's AD. And then as Title IX and the NCAA adopted and brought on women's sports shortly after the passage of Title IX, you saw a lot of these athletics departments merge into one department. Well, then who became the leader of both men's and women's athletics? More times than not, it was the male athletics director. And we know data says, in not all cases, I don't want to paint a broad brush, but data tells us that as leaders, there can be a tendency to hire people who look like you and that you might relate best to. And so trying to overcome some of that and providing education to sport leaders, athletics directors, hiring managers is so important. But that's really one piece of history that I can point to say, because we still have a majority of athletics programs at every level of sport, from high school on through college and pro, there's still work to be done in terms of hiring more women into these leadership roles. But sometimes because of the leadership, then inherently you end up with the hiring practices of hiring people who look like you. So we do a lot of work and to educate and try to advocate for the importance of having women leading women's teams. Not to say we can't have men coaching women. That's not the case at all. We benefit from having
a diverse range of coaches. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're at our very best when everyone is represented in the locker room. But we do know that the data is telling us we're losing women at a higher rate than we are men. And so that's why we've tried to be very intentional in our mission to increase more women in sport.
Now, is some of that education with the senior leadership of universities? Because, I'm sure, and I'd love to make sure we talk about all of the things that WeCOACH is doing. Certainly, any organization can't be all things to all people. And so many of the challenges that we just talked about, you can only focus your time on a couple of them maybe, right? Yeah. So what are the ones that you focus on? And does that include, just as you were mentioning, the senior leadership of the organizations, which might feel like it's a step removed from the women coaches and the programs themselves and the retention, but as you point out, is a critical, step that precedes even just the hiring.
Yeah, well, and we've grown tremendously in the last 3 years since 2022 when I joined WeCOACH, and I really credit it to the commissioners and the athletics directors at the high school and collegiate levels that have stepped up and realized that it's going to make their lives a bit easier as they go out and try to hire coaches if they've got a pool to draw from. And so we've had a lot of the growth that we've seen is because the sport leaders are seeing the need to provide women coaches with a women's based community for them to grow, have support, develop, learn, and advance. And so really grateful for the leaders that have joined as school district-wide and conference-wide members. We now serve over half of the Division I, II, and III conferences as conference-wide members of WeCOACH. And so that's a lot of it, is having the support of leadership to continue to recruit, advance, and retain more women in coaching.
Yeah, I mean, it's the focus is so critical, because if you're spread too thin, it's hard to move the needle.
And we're really grateful. We partner with organizations like the Women's Sports Foundation and Women Leaders in Sport to also, Women Leaders in Sport serves leaders and that are in any level of sport. But they have a strong base at the collegiate level, for example, of sport leadership. And so we partner with them as well to help with some of the education efforts to continue to advocate for doing everything you can, going to every extent possible as you build a pool of candidates to make sure that it's a diverse, qualified pool, and try to eliminate as many unintentional biases as you can, and then hire the best candidate.
So we've talked a little bit about mentors that you had, Vanessa, and I know that's also a huge part of what WeCOACH offers. Can you talk a little bit about the Triad mentorship model that your organization employs?
Yeah, we're really proud that we mentor program that we offer. And like you mentioned, Molly, we've really set this program up based on the data. We know we're losing women at the highest rate in years 7 to 10 of their coaching career. And if you think about the timing of that, these young women are graduating from college in their early 20s. They're coaching 7 to 10 years. That puts them somewhere late 20s, early 30s. And certainly some of them may still be figuring out what they want to do with their careers, but others, they may be starting relationships. They may be getting married and starting families. And that's when we know that, some of these, that's what we can point to as far as some of the reasons that we're seeing women dropping out of coaching around that 7 to 10 year mark. So we've set up our We Mentor program to really focus on those women in years 5 to 10 of their career. They're considered the silver member of the trio, and they're mentoring the bronze, these entry-level coaches who are just beginning their careers. They're the mentor for them, but they're also getting mentored by the gold member in the trio, which those are women with 10 or more years of experience, many of them with head coaching experience. And so we're trying to work it from both angles to try to keep inspiring these women to stay in the profession and work through that period where we're seeing them drop out at the highest rates.
Yeah, I'm interested also in kind of the landscape for assistant coaches. I was trying to find some data for that, and it seems like women are slightly better represented there. It seems like for women's sports, the number I saw was around 50% of assistant coaches are female, and for men's sports or more broadly co-ed sports, I think it's still around 8%. So it seems like, are women getting stuck in those positions? Are they staying in the position because that's perhaps a little easier to balance travel schedules and family obligations? Maybe it's a role they like better, in fact, because, I think a lot of times assistant coaches are the ones who get a little more contact with the athletes and, aren't as concerned with the high level decision making. So maybe that's really why they're there. But I'm curious sort of how much we know about that. Are they just getting stuck there and leaving? Is that something that you have data on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it might be a little of all of what you mentioned, Molly, as far as the reasons that maybe there's better representation at the assistant coach level. There's certainly more assistant coach openings than a head coach role, right? Some teams might have more than one assistant coach. You have one head coach, and then you might have some assistants or associate head coaches. What we're really trying to focus on there is how do we best prepare these women to take that next step in their career? So if they do aspire for an increased leadership role, like moving into a head coaching role, we have dedicated programming that we call We Elevate assistant coaches. And We Elevate's really intended to do just that, set these women who are aspiring to be a head coach one day, give them the tools, give them the experience, and surround them with support so that they're adequately and intentionally preparing for that next leadership step in their career. But it could be a number of factors for why there's more representation there at the assistant levels. What we need to do is keep them in and keep them inspired to be really great assistants until they get that opportunity as a head coach. I think something that hiring managers don't always realize is there are some differences in how maybe a male might approach a job opening compared to a female. And we know the data tells us that women they've got to check all the boxes on the job description. And sometimes women need someone to reach out and say, hey, I think you'll be really great for this role. Why don't you apply? And while their male counterparts may not need that additional encouragement, right? And so that's too some of what we're trying to educate and combat is understanding that when we say that sport leaders who are hiring positions have to really be intentional in their hiring process, many of them, if they haven't reached out directly to invite women to apply, they may not get any women to apply. And that's just some of the differences in the genders that as sport leadership continue to work in their careers that they need to recognize and understand.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had kind of been thinking of a similar angle, more in, do women coaches just coach a little different? Does it look different maybe than the way men coach? And not to put a value judgment on it, but is there sort of a perception of what a head coach persona looks like? And is that something that we need to kind of adjust or, educate on varying styles of leadership?
Yeah, and you're right. There's the varying styles, just like there's several men that coach differently, and it's based on personalities and approach and philosophies and core values. Same goes for women. I will say this, we know some of the data does point to, and this kind of relates to gender bias at times, where if there's a strong female that is demanding and may even with the choice of language, there's a different reaction from not only athletes but also sport leadership, where women are coming under fire for having a more aggressive approach, a strong approach to coaching than maybe their male counterparts. So we know that there's a concern out there that women are losing their jobs when maybe their male counterparts are conducting themselves in the same manner, but it's an accepted norm, for men to behave that way, but maybe not for a strong woman. And so we're trying to also combat some of those stereotypes, some of those gender biases in the work that we're doing to continue to allow women and empower them to lead exactly from where they are and how they're compelled to lead. And that's okay. We can have all types and all of them can be successful in the approach that they bring. But we've got to be careful when some of the gender bias creeps in and women are being called into question for it, but maybe their male counterparts aren't.
It's interesting. You see that both not only in coaching, but also in the athletes, right? We're seeing that in regular news with a number of prominent players today. And the style and approach that could be identical across genders, but just treated very differently. And this isn't new, like that type of that issue is certainly not something that is specific to athletics, but you do see it a lot. I feel, and in a world of social media where everything is being recorded at all times, it's hard for something that one might do that maybe historically there just volumetrically there aren't as many cameras may have gone unnoticed before, and now you just have it's impossible, right?
Yeah. This example, I think I know what you're going to bring up, where there was a little pushing and shoving going on in the women's game last night, and I was proud of the league for coming back and saying players aren't going to be suspended, they're going to get fined, and they were assessed the appropriate flagrant fouls, but that happens often in the men's game. And so we've got to react to those situations similarly, right? And not over-penalize one gender over another when it does get heated, because sport is competitive. And, and so emotions sometimes get out of check. Yeah. But I did see that. And similarly, just you mentioned, Matt, the media. There's a tendency for the media to use different language and paint women's sports and women athletes differently than males. And I was just on a call with a coach who coaches a young girls ice hockey team. And the club wanted to call the team Baby Blues. And she was like, no. These are young teenage girls. We're not calling them baby anything. You wouldn't call a young boys teenage team the baby anything. So, and I love that, because there is a tendency to also, along the same lines of kind of these gender stereotypes, to characterize or paint women athletes in sports differently than men's sports. And so and I think the media is learning that and trying to be more mindful about that. And I've loved some of these commercials that have come out recently, really showing just how fierce these women athletes, that these women's teams can be, how competitive, the drive, and so that's sport, and it should be portrayed that way. Yeah,
well, and it ranges not only just from conduct on the court, like the example you mentioned, but also I saw one where Caitlin was on her phone and the the camera was kind of panning in on her, and I think the lip read was, I should put my phone away because I might get yelled at for not like paying attention. And so, but the point is that she was hyper conscious of not only her image, but also of like expectations. And so it was just an interesting sort of very brief interaction that's this microcosm of the scrutiny that I think that they're under. I have two questions related to retention and the sort of the numbers, right? The first is the challenge that would be the pipeline, right? So one reason why it would be depressed is because the pipeline of individuals is lower than we'd like. So part of that is then the training of women to be coaches, right? So it's not just women in these positions for the sake of it. It's also making sure that there's adequate training. So can you speak a bit to programs either at WeCOACH or elsewhere that aid in ensuring that it's a sort of like encouragement into this career path, and therefore the resources devoted to, you have the ingredients to be a good coach, we're going to help you and give you the tools to make that an actual career for you so that you can then be marketable. The second thing that I'd like to get to is, I'm curious, I think this is true anecdotally. I don't know if you see this in your leadership role in WeCOACH and more generally as an organization, is people who, particularly in the running space, I suspect that coaches for running tend to be the coach for cross country and indoor and outdoor. And that then might have the effect of making it difficult for a coach, whereas a coach in another sport might be able to take an off season. Whereas in running, it might be that you have the entire year. And so I'm curious, it seems like logically it makes sense that that would weigh on the numbers that we see specifically for cross country, indoor and outdoor, because the demand of coaches generally, not just for women, might be higher because it's the entire year. It therefore makes the things that you talked about, whether that's starting a family, managing burnout, et cetera, that much more difficult to do.
Yeah, you're right about that. And I'll address that one and then maybe go back to your question about the pipeline and recruiting more women to the profession. But, I think also, and our report came out today, and it addresses a little bit of this, because we know that some of the grades in our report that came out today, cross country, track and field, are some of the lowest graded sports in terms of having women as head coaches. But another point to think about is many times those head coaches of cross country and track and field, not only is it all year round, they're in season all year. Fall, winter, spring, they're always in season because of the indoor-outdoor component. So definitely a different time demand than a lot of other sports. So hats off to all of my cross country and track and field coaches out there, because it is a long, grueling year. And with the year-round nature of sport, even their summers are, if you're coaching some high-level athletes, there's training throughout the summers even, so there's not any downtime. But I think too, what you're also combating in terms of getting more women into the head coaching roles for cross-country and track and field is it's a co-ed team. And so we're seeing also that women they're not getting hired to coach boys and men. There are women that have interest in coaching boys and male athletes. And how do we continue to prepare them for those roles, but then also educate the leadership about the need there. And so I think that's also a dynamic that's at play, because if you look in our report card that came out today, the sports that received what I would say is an F grade in the report card: cross country, track and field, fencing, diving, it's co-ed sports. And so that's also, I think, a big factor, is it's an opportunity to coach not only women, but also male athletes. Here's what I would say to that, though. I've sat through a lot of press conferences, and when I listen to a male student athlete, when they're asked by the reporter, tell us who's the most influential person in your life, a lot of these men say their mothers their grandmothers, their sisters, their aunts. It's a woman. And so surely if a female can be the most influential person in one of these young men's lives, why can't we coach them? We absolutely can. And we can have such effective relationships and competitive success. It's just being given the opportunity. And so that's where I think we're missing some of this, is those opportunities to be able to coach young boys and men.
So does that come around then to my first question, which is, how do we ensure that there's the training available for women? Because as you say, it's not I suspect, an interest, but perhaps it's like anybody, it's trying to understand how do you get the best out of the athletes on your team?
This was a need that when I came in and 3 years ago, identified that we weren't doing enough as an organization. And I noticed also the sport and coaches associations weren't doing enough to really build that pipeline, like you mentioned, Matt, and start to be intentional about recruiting who's next and building a diverse pool of coaches. And so we launched in late 2022. We hosted our first Catch a Vision. We now call it We Aspire, but that's our program for aspiring coaches to get them in the pipeline, start to give them the skills, the tools, the knowledge. And we're starting young. We're starting to work with partners like NFL teams, USTA in tennis, to really start when they're in high school, even to help them catch a vision that coaching can be a really rewarding career for you. And we've got to get the help of current coaches, both men and women who coach, to start tapping these young athletes and helping to inspire them to maybe consider a career in coaching if they think that they've got some kids on their team that would make really great coaches. And so we're constantly talking with our community about that effort of recruiting. I was just on a call today with one of the NBA teams about a clinic they're starting in the summers to get middle and high school girls to come to a camp where they're going to try to inspire them to coach. And so then not only does that give them something to aspire for, but it also makes them a better athlete. If you think about it, if they're starting that young, coaching the game and learning the X's and O's and how to be an effective communicator and leader, it's just going to make them that much more impactful in the sport that they play. And so we've got some intentional efforts that we're partnering with organizations. Flag football is the fastest growing sport at the high school level for girls right now across the country. And so how do we start to recruit more women to the sport of flag football? That's another example of a huge opportunity. And so that has been something that we've been very intentional. We're also starting to work on some concepts around an aspiring coaches academy, similar to our Women Coaches Academy that we've been hosting for over 20 years, but specific to those women that are just breaking into coaching, that are still looking for the opportunity to land that first coaching job. I'll credit the WBCA. They're one of our partners, and we've worked with them on their So You Want to Be a Coach program for many years now, and they bring out 60, 70 recently graduated women's basketball players at the collegiate level who come to the SO program, and it's to launch them into a basketball coaching career. They were one of the only coaches associations for a long while that had a recruitment program for aspiring coaches to get more women into the game. Now other coaches associations have stepped up, other sport associations are stepping up and doing something similar, and we're proud to be able to partner with many of them to conduct that programming.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're thinking about kind of tapping girls on the shoulder in high school or earlier, because when I think about, decisions on what you're going to major in, or, there's, whether you choose exercise physiology or, there's so many great programs now in sports management and sports administration. But I think if those decisions aren't kind of at least put in your head early, you've potentially missed a career choice, especially, at the collegiate level where applicants are really coming in with those credentials. And that's something I think, I'm guessing probably fewer high school girls are hearing than boys.
Yeah, and there's some great programs too that these middle and high school girls are able to be junior coaches. So they're coaching peers who might be a little bit younger than them. And how cool is that? That now this younger generation coming up have these role models that are a little bit older than them, but also that they can look up to and aspire to be if they don't maybe have a coach that looks like them on their staff. Now they've got these junior coaches that are helping. And so there's some really great programming out there that we're proud to be a part of that is continuing to build that pipeline.
So in every interaction I've ever had with you, and I suspect this is true for Molly as well, I hope listeners know that this is going to be on YouTube and can watch this as well, which is important to say that it is so hard to watch you and not just feel your energy in in what you bring. That said, I suspect that you deal with yourself challenges and just the days where it's really hard. And
for sure.
So, to the extent that you're willing and can share, on a deeper level, how do you, your staff, the coaches, how do you navigate the emotional and logistical toll of this work? Both in the highs, but also in when you put your all into something and you're like, how did this not work?
Can you hear my dog barking? Sorry.
We can, it's okay.
He's like, you're going to have to edit this part out. Anywho. Matt, I appreciate you asking the question because it's a challenge for all of us, no matter what industry you're in. Life-work balance, life-work integration, life-work flow, whatever you want to call it, it's not easy, myself included. I started with WeCOACH in 2022 with big vision ideas, and I'm not a very patient person, and I don't pace things very well. I'll be honest with you, I worked my first 2 years. I took 1 day off in 2 years. And I can tell you that's not a healthy plan. And so I learned going through that burnout is very real. And we talk often with our coaches, and I credit our coaches. A lot of our members ask us often for more programming on self-care, wellness, mental health, and not just for how they support their athletes, but for themselves. Because you can imagine, just with your experience with running and cross country and track and field, and noting that it's a year-round endeavor for these coaches. We often hear our coaches share with us it's 24/7, 365, 500 miles an hour, and so they ask us to provide more programming to support them so that they can go out and then model self-care and what that looks like to do those things that regularly refill your tank and allow you to bring the best version of you to the job. And so that is a key priority for us, is to continue to encourage our coaches that they've got to take care of themselves first if they're going to be successful and thrive in this very challenging career. And I'll mention too, for our moms in our community, that's another one, that mom guilt is a very real thing. And because of the demands of coaching, we try to encourage moms who coach that it's never going to be a balance. Forget about balance. It's really more like a flow. And when you're in season, maybe the flow of your time is more toward your sport and supporting your team. And then you've got to be intentional to allow yourself, when you're out of season and those points in the year where maybe not as demanding, that the flow goes more towards your life and your family and doing the things to make you a really great mom at home. And so that's something too that we've continued to advocate for in our community, because it is really hard. It's a tough profession, and it's why some coaches are not able to stay in it, but we're trying to give them the tools to continue to persevere.
There's kind of a critical point also. I mean, I think maybe less so in high school because kids are living at home. They have parents available and siblings. But in college, often the coach is like your constant trusted adult over 4 years. That's the one person that you might have a continuous connection with. Yeah. And I was kind of struck, you were kind enough to invite me to the workshop in Boston last year, and in conversations that I was having with collegiate coaches there, the amount of emotional work that they do, just kind of supporting athletes outside the sport, and just, making sure people are getting and finding the resources they need, even if it's,
Yes.
tangentially connected to athletics or grades, academics. Like, it's an incredible role to be able to have in people's lives, to be that person. But when you're being that person for dozens of athletes, like, it has to take a toll.
Absolutely. And setting boundaries for our coaches is also an important thing. Like when they're taking time away, that they're really away and not answering the phone, not responding to emails, setting boundaries with the athletes, setting boundaries with their department, making sure they've got a great plan of coverage while they are taking time away so they can truly be away. But you're so right. It's not only challenging for these coaches, but certainly, Matt, you talked about just the cameras are always on, they're always in the spotlight, and that takes a toll on student athletes. And so I think one of the best developments over the last several years, and it really started to ramp up the investment of wellness and mental health professionals in athletics departments supporting student athletes. We probably need some similar support for our coaches as well and our administrators on campuses. And I think some of that, being able to, as a coach, to say, hey, I want to support you every step of the way, and I will walk you over to get the help that you need. But the ability for them to be able to hand off the student athlete to one of the professionals to help support them with their needs has been a huge development, but it still doesn't make it any lighter for these coaches. It's definitely something that is at times pretty heavy for them to carry.
Do you see a difference at all in any of what we've talked about across different divisions in the NCAA? Is it greater or easier? And I know that these are broad brushes and not consistent with every institution within a given division, but how you see that across different divisions with both coaches and athletes?
I don't know that there's anyone that's less or easier as far as the divisions, but I would say that what we try to encourage our coaches is, for example, if they're in Division I and they're feeling like it may not be a fit, go explore an opportunity in Divisions 2 and 3, because there's some unbelievable opportunities to work with student athletes at still a very high level and have a very rewarding career as a coach. I heard from one of our coaches in our community. She now goes and is a coach for coaches. She got out of coaching, but she said, I coached in Division I for so long, and I wish I would still be coaching today if I had known the advantages of coaching Division 2 and 3. And same thing, we've got a lot of Division 2 and 3 coaches that aspire to move into roles in Division 1. And so encouraging our coaches that if you feel like the level you're coaching currently may not be a fit for you, try looking for opportunities at a different level, and you might find a lot more enjoyment and success.
So, we've talked about the programs of WeCOACH, various things that you're doing, other organizations are doing. We've got reports that highlight current state. How can we bring this into practical ways for people outside of WeCOACH, be that coaches that are not currently members, athletes like myself, listeners, parents, fans of the game? What are practical ways that people can get involved, either with WeCOACH or ways that outside of WeCOACH you think are really useful ways to help move the numbers and advance the mission?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. We welcome everyone in our community, both current, former, and retired coaches, but also allies, champions of the work that we're doing. And there's a number of ways that folks can help in advancing our mission. We're really focused right now. I mentioned a little bit earlier the work that we're trying to do at the grassroots and youth levels, and really trying to inspire more women to coach at those levels, maybe even moms who have children who are participating on those teams to raise their hands and offer to coach those teams. That's one way that we're trying to inspire more moms to coach at the youth and grassroots levels. But we have a number of ways, and similar to what we were talking about earlier with tapping who's next and really inspiring these young girls and young women who would make really great coaches to help them catch a vision for their careers. There's also ways that if you know a coach out there and they could use some support, they may be the only coach in their team or their program or their school that's a female, gift them a membership to WeCOACH, and we would love to support them and welcome them to our community. Yes, we do year-round professional growth and leadership development programs, but I think what's most inspiring about what we do is we do have this incredible, empowering community of support. We now serve over 18,000 women coaches across the country as active members, and we would love to welcome more. So thank you for asking.
And how about athletes that are, they're not in college, your everyday person like myself? I know that certainly WeCOACH is a nonprofit and people can donate, but are there other material and in-person ways that people can get involved and engaged with you?
Even if it's just giving us a quick follow on social media and helping to grow our brand awareness and reach, that could be one. But one of the efforts that we've been doing with our recruitment is if there are high school and collegiate student athletes that want to get into coaching, if their institution is a member of WeCOACH, we've been allowing those institutions to add those aspiring coaches to their WeCOACH rosters. And so we're trying to continue to get the word out that any student athletes that hear about our organization and are curious, if their school is already a member, they can get added to the membership and start taking advantage of our resources. So that's something too that we've been doing to really build this pipeline and start getting more young coaches involved in WeCOACH.
What does membership look like for either a university or for a high school?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we pride ourselves on affordable access. And so a year, 12-month, 1-year membership, youth and high school coaches, students can join for only $59 a year. Collegiate coaches on up through pro and national, that price point for an individual is $99 a year. And then we offer group rates for high schools as well as colleges and conferences. But a high school can join and sign up all of their women coaches for $200 flat rate. And so we're really trying to create affordable pathways for every level of sport, because we realize that the dollars are not unlimited and not every team and organization have significant professional development budgets. And so, but to be able to, if you just have more than 4 women working for your high school, it makes sense for you to join as a group member at $200 flat rate for the year. And we have similar group rates for the collegiate levels as well.
And what exactly does that provide the school?
So a membership, then you have access as a member to the 12 different programs that we offer. And we've got programming running year-round, multiple programs each month that are ongoing. We talked about some of them. We mentor, our academies, our We Elevate and We Aspire programs. All of that comes with the membership. For some of our on-site, in-person programs, there is a registration fee or a tuition fee. But being a member then gives you access to be able to apply or register for those events.
What are you most proud of when you look back at your tenure thus far at WeCOACH, even in the work that you did leading up to that? What are you most proud of having accomplished, as part of the WeCOACH team?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Certainly proud of our growth, but more than that, just the feedback that we get. We're fresh off of our academies that were in Denver less than a month ago now. And I can't tell you how many coaches tell us, and will stand up at the end on graduation day and say, I was at the end of my rope. I was ready to get out of coaching. Didn't think I could continue in this profession. I was destined to go and look for another job. And they said that 3 days at our academy inspired them, gave them the motivation, the perseverance to stay in the profession. And so it's feedback like that from our members, sharing the impact that our work and our organization is making. It's just been one of the most rewarding career opportunities of my life. I'm very grateful to be able to do this work every day.
Okay, so I've got a super important question.
Okay.
This could be make or break for our relationship, by the way.
Yeah.
Some people find their energy innately, and others, well, they will have that innately, need coffee. So are you a coffee person?
For sure.
Or are you, because I know people on the opposite side of the spectrum where they're like, I don't touch a drop. So are you pro or against?
I am pro coffee, pro caffeine. I make my
It's a performance
latte every
enhancing.
morning.
Yeah.
We are coffee people.
and then I might have a 5-hour energy or a Red Bull in the afternoon. So I'm all about the coffee. I've learned that running a nonprofit is not for the faint of heart, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So I welcome all the caffeine that I can get.
Do you, since we are a running organization, do you run? When was the last race that you've entered into?
Don't
What,
ask
didn't
me this.
your dad coach track? Do I have that
Yes.
right?
Yes. Good memory. Yes. My dad was a cross country and track and field coach in the 70s. And then we kids came along and my mom told him to hang it up. And so and then he started coaching us. But yeah, he's been an incredible influence for me. I'm not a great runner. In track and field, I was a thrower. So I threw discus, shot put. I learned javelin and hammer when I was in college. I threw at FSU after the basketball season was over. I ran to stay in shape. The last time I ran in a race, oh my goodness, it might have been the turkey trot in my neighborhood before Thanksgiving, and it was like a 5K. I'm not sure if I even ran the whole way, and I'm sure I complained every step of the way.
Even coming from a track and field cross country family, it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My sister was a phenomenal runner. I did not get her build. And so we're built, I don't know how this worked out, but she was a phenomenal runner in high school and went on to run 1 year in college as well and loved it. She could go miles and miles and miles. I can run, but it's more just to try to stay in shape.
I think one of the things Molly and I care deeply about is that running can, in both high school and in college, be used as almost a form of punishment. You know, like go
Yeah,
run.
we
a
are
lap.
the sport that is the punishment in other sports.
And
Yes.
and I wish that wasn't the case. But if there's a part of your future programming that can discourage the use of running as a
Laps.
form of punishment, we would appreciate it. I think athletes
I agree.
would. But I think that
We should just switch to burpees for that.
Yes, yeah, that would be a better form of
Universally
punishment.
hated and no
Yes.
one's actual sport.
Yeah,
Correct.
our volleyball team, they never ran. They just did burpees and push-ups as punishment. So they're onto something there, Molly.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. And I am impressed. I will say we've made some progress because as I came back to campus and watched Florida State teams train, the science behind it, I honestly, I think I played 4 years of college basketball and my legs were dead for every game. And it was because we didn't have all the science to tell us the rest, recovery, the load. And gosh, we ran a lot. There was conditioning every day. And so I hear you on that, but I feel like the training is getting so much better. It's not quantity, it's quality. And there's really a lot more attention being paid to the rest and recovery of these athletes and knowing when to say when and using it as conditioning, but not punishment.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the science, and Molly, curious if you have other observations here, but I think a lot of the performance science that we have today largely comes from cycling and running. And so a lot of the things that all sports benefit from they're benefiting from people running on a treadmill and doing these tests, or these cycling tests. And so I'd like to think that other sports owe running a great deal of gratitude and some thanks for helping identify how can we improve and enhance performance. But that's my take.
You mentioning, and this is a totally random story, my freshman year, I come into Florida State and, they do all the testing to get medically cleared. And I had a little blip with my EKG. So they had me go in and do a stress test. I didn't know what a stress test was. So I show up at the doctor's office for my stress test wearing Birkenstock sandals. And I did a stress test on a treadmill, and they've got a tread on the treadmill, like it's barefoot. And I must have had blisters on the bottom because they had me running at a pretty good clip. When I was in shape, I could run.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy it, but I could run. And they had me running on this stress test on the treadmill at a pretty good clip, and it left blisters all over the bottom of my feet. So yes, we've got some really great data that's come out of running and treadmills, but I still am scarred for life, having done my stress test in bare feet.
Yeah. So as we sort of wrap things up, I guess, what gives you hope? You know, we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about things that make it difficult for you to do your job. There's a reason why WeCOACH exists, and there's a reason why these reports and the report cards come out. So what gives you hope in, hey, there's something that's working here. We need to keep pushing that boulder. What are those for you right now?
Yeah. And it's timely because the report came out today, but I'll say this, that, the report is telling us we're headed in the right direction. The numbers are going in the right direction. For so many years, we couldn't say that. We were seeing a decline, steady, stagnant. Now we've had a few years that we've strung together where the numbers are continuing to go in a positive direction. And so that continues to give me hope that we are going to be able to turn this around. And like I started with, be able in some ways to impact history going forward.
Just on the topic of the report, I have heard people in the industry, when talking about the report, express the concern that, schools that get an F, that there isn't necessarily a consequence. Do you see that changing from either increased prominence of the report or people taking it more seriously? Or do you think there's a lot more work left on the report truly being an agent of change, not just a report of what is changing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I do think there's some genuine effort by sport leaders to address if they are in a situation where their campus could afford to have more women on their staffs. And I think there is some efforts being made, and that's why we're seeing these numbers go in a better direction, in a positive direction. As far as our report, the Tucker Center does a great job. We do a select number of conferences in Division I, and so it's not representative of all of Division I or even Divisions 2 and 3. And so we've talked with the Tucker Center about maybe extending and expanding the data set so that we have more information, what's going on in each of the levels of NCAA college athletics. But then even I've talked with them about how do we grow the data at the youth and high school levels. There's not a lot of reliable or recent data, and it's hard to track because it's so transient. But there's definitely some work still to be done, but I am encouraged that we're going in some positive directions with the last several years of the data that we've pulled for these conferences.
Last question for me, and then I'll hand it over to Molly for any final thoughts on her end. But there's been a number of recent changes in the NCAA regarding scholarship and roster caps. Is there anything there that could impact, for better or worse, the ability for any of the dimensions we've talked about? Retention, recruiting, funding, the quality of athletes coming if there are challenges with respect to scholarships. How do you see that impacting the figurative playing field for coaches?
There are with these changes, some positive impacts as far as at least women were included with now the revenue share. There are some concerns that it's not being done equitably. And so I do think that needs to be addressed, that we're setting up a model based on revenue producing sports. Well, revenue producing sports were set up on a model over 100 years ago when women weren't being invested in. And so how can we be revenue producing when we haven't had quite the head start? And so I think there's some opportunities there to at least women were considered with the revenue share model that's now going into play starting this year, but certainly some work to do there to make sure that those funds are being distributed equitably to both deserving men and women student athletes. There's some threats, certainly, with budget cuts that are having to happen to be able to afford some of these changes. The House settlement the new revenue share model. Not that it impacts every level of collegiate athletics, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on because there's speculation that maybe more programs are going to start dropping Olympic sports and or women's sports. And so there's certainly that fear. Anytime you're having budget cuts, that there might be some difficult decisions to cut participation opportunities. So hoping that that doesn't happen and that we find some ways that we can still support all of the existing teams. For us, we're nervous because anytime there's budget cuts, professional development, unfortunately, is one of the first things that gets cut from the budget. And not that I agree with that model. Here I've got sport leaders saying, where are all the women? How do I hire women? And then you cut the professional development for them. But it's a reality. And so we're trying to also look at different ways to be able to fund not only high schools, but even conferences and universities to be members of WeCOACH, courtesy of some of our partners and sponsors. And so we're working on continuing to grow the number of partners that are providing memberships to more women coaches in our community. So we're not having to go and ask either the coach or their schools or teams to fund the membership.
Just a final observation from me is it's the thing that really upsets me, and I'm sure it upsets you, that on one hand you have sometimes these performative shows of support for women in sport, and then they turn around and these kinds of decisions are made. Yeah. And it's really frustrating as a spectator in that, not having any ability to do anything about it, that you have that dichotomy from a corner of the world who are purporting to, making policy decisions that are purportedly in support of women in sport, but then whether it's funding cuts, just so many other actions that really matter end up really undercutting that. And my hope with Legwork, our hope with Legwork, is that we're shedding light on these often unseen efforts that are very important, but are, just less understood or seen because it's the hard work that is needed, but is a constant sort of background force to keep things moving. Molly, anything from you?
I mean, maybe on a more positive note, I'm curious.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
No. Given, I know that professional sports and coaches isn't necessarily your realm, but I do feel like women's sports professionally have really gotten a much bigger spotlight in recent years and a lot more attention and a lot better coverage. And I'm wondering, I think we started to see some of that trickle down to like the Final Four for women this year. And are we allowed to call it the Final Four for women now? I think we are. How has that affected anything at the collegiate level? Or have we not really seen the impact of that yet?
Yeah, it's been amazing to see more and more sports offering professional opportunities for these women to be able to play here in the United States. Because as you know, a lot of them were having to travel internationally and for a better part of the year to live overseas playing if they wanted to continue their playing careers. So to see the many, not only soccer, certainly the WNBA is on fire, but hockey and others providing these pro opportunities. Volleyball has got multiple leagues, and softball. So really exciting for these women athletes to be able to continue their careers here in the United States if that's something they desire to do. And it's also a great way to continue to build that pipeline. We're seeing a lot of the pro leagues doing some great work to elevate more women into leadership roles at the pro levels as coaches, as front office leadership. And so it's really encouraging to see the work that's being done. We're fortunate. We do partner with the NFL, the NHL, some NWSL teams that we work with, and others that we're continuing to try to support the great work that they're doing to elevate women at the pro level of sport. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm sure as a pipeline also to coaching. That's something that we see in men's sports all the time. As you were a professional player and then you potentially move into a coaching role, and women just really didn't have the platform for that, or at least the visible platform in a lot of sports.
Absolutely. Yeah, all of that there's just such a great momentum and movement happening for women in sport right now. The investment, but also the opportunities to play professionally, but then also to carry on their careers even beyond their playing careers is really exciting. That what we're seeing, and I hope it continues, and I hope it helps to offset some of the challenges that we just talked about in the last question to continue to establish this movement for women in sport.
Well, and maybe one part of the answer to a question I asked you before of what can people do, bums in seats and buy tickets and, get yourself to a game. It is absolutely exciting. Seeing how the WNBA is taking such a prominent view in the public eye, and it's amazing. And I hope that we continue to see that in running. Often I think that the women's field is more exciting than the men's pro field, and in a number of the races, it's generally deeper. And so, obviously with marathons, it's not necessarily bums in seats, but it certainly would be for a number of the other sports that we've been talking about here, including and especially, basketball at a number of levels.
Absolutely.
So, Vanessa, thank you so much for your time and for having this conversation with us. We've really enjoyed having you and being a critical part of our launching this podcast and these types of discussions. They're very important discussions that we would like to have and that we think people are interested in. And so thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that we did not discuss that you just feel like you really want us or people to know about you, WeCOACH, or the climate?
Nothing really to close out with, just to say to our coaches and any Legwork listeners that are coaches that we need you. What you do matters. Keep leading. And Molly, Matt, thank you so much for your support. We can't do this great work without you. Really grateful for the conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much, Vanessa.
Molly and I were so excited to have this conversation with Vanessa. She brings so much experience, energy, and just hearing about the vital work that WeCOACH is doing is inspiring and shows how deeply needed this organization is because of their commitment to providing resources to sustain women in coaching. If this conversation resonated with you, send it to somebody else who you think might appreciate it as well. Subscribe to the show and keep putting in the legwork.